I happened to come across the book today. I had not seen any advance on it, and because I haven't been in the office or not, I didn't receive a copy. So I'm sure I got them at the fan, but I haven't been at the fan in a couple of months. And I usually get all the sports books, and then I decide which ones I want to read, and then I have them on. But I thought the book was interesting because of the subject matter, so I said, let's put the author on anyway, even though I haven't read it. The book is Bouton, about Jim Bouton. And you may or may not know, but Bouton is a very important historical figure because he basically changed the way sports were covered in America. He was a very good pitcher. Bulldog Jim Bouton had a very good couple of years, had great years with the Yankees in the early 60s. Had a good career, but then wrote a book that is a legendary book and a book that changed the way baseball was covered, the way it really changed I think I'd even go so far, and we'll talk to the author about it, changed the player-media relationship. It went so far as to do that. The author is Mitchell Nathanson, who I see also wrote a book around Richie Allen, which I got to ask him about because I used to actually go to games just to watch Richie Allen play. I was fascinated by Richie Allen, the hitter. He was one of my favorite players growing up, from his days with the Phillies all the way through the Cardinals and everywhere else. I was fascinated by Richie Allen, who could have been one of the greatest players of all time if he ever paid. I think Bobby Bonds and Richie Allen got more out of less in terms of concentration and trying than probably two players who ever lived. Not Barry Bonds, Bobby Bonds, his father, and Richie Allen. Because Richie Allen basically gave about half an effort and had a great career. But that's a different story. Let's first talk about the book Bouton with the author, Mitchell Nathanson. Mitchell, Mike Francesa, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
My pleasure. Okay. Your real job is you're a professor, right?
Yes, at Villanova.
Okay. Oh, great. How long you been there?
As long as Jay Wright.
Oh, really?
Jay
That
Wright
long, huh? Really?
Yeah, we showed up at the same time. With
Really?
the same fanfare.
Where do you hail from? What's home for you?
Trenton.
Oh, Trenton.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
You grew up, what kind of fan growing up?
I grew up a Phillies fan. Across the street, everyone was a Mets fan.
I got you. Okay, so that's why Richie Allen and with the old Phils. All right, Bouton, the book. Tell me what your thought process was. Why to do a book on Bouton?
Well, as you said, I did the book about Allen, and he's such an iconoclast. He's hard to figure out, right? And so when I finished that, I was thinking, well, geez, who's next? How do you top, Dick Allen? And there's not many places you can go, but I think one of the places you can go is Bouton. And Bouton didn't, for a guy who wrote a lot, there wasn't a lot written about him, really. I
Right.
mean, he wrote a lot,
Right.
but there really wasn't. And so I thought, geez, I would be interested in a book like that, and nobody's written one, so I'll write one. And so that's how that started. And so then I approached him, and it took a while to get him to agree, but then he eventually did. And so then the result was the book.
I met Bouton a couple of times. Didn't know him well. A little aloof, but really never really crossed circles with him that much. I remember him as a player. Those are the first teams I remember growing up a Yankee fan. He had great years in 63 and 64. He won 39 games, and quite ironically, won the classic Game 3, Mickey hitting a walk-off home run to win a game for Bouton, who later they became very central figures because wouldn't you say that his depiction, especially of Mantle, was really what caused a lot of the anger in baseball towards Bouton when he wrote the legendary book?
Yeah. In fact, a lot of the players who spoke after the book, and then who I spoke to also, they said that they weren't so upset about anything that Bouton said about them. They were more upset about what Bouton said about Mantle. Because as you know, Mantle is Mickey Mantle.
Right,
he's
God.
He's up on the pedestal,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So, if you're going to knock him off that pedestal, a lot of people would get offended by that, and nobody was more offended than Joe Pepitone, who was interesting because he was a contemporary of Bouton, not
Yep.
Mantle,
Yep.
but he revered Mantle.
No question, they all did. I mean, they worshipped him. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That I came to find in the years that I interviewed Mantle, who was my idol growing up, and the players, even in older years, were so protective of everything Mantle did. I mean, so whether it was Yogi, Whitey, whoever, they worshipped him, and they said he was the best guy to everybody. Everybody on the team loved him. Everybody. So Bouton writes a book that kind of pulls the lid off. And what people don't realize is any kid who's growing up who wants to learn about sports, any kid who wants to learn about being a sports writer, anybody who wants to go into anything with writing should read Bull Fall 4, which is one of the, I would say without question, one of the classic sports books ever written.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's that The Boys of Summer. Those are like the two books that you have to read if you're a baseball fan and you're interested in anything. Interesting thing about Mantle and Bouton was that a lot of people thought that Bouton had some sort of axe to grind with Mantle. Bouton loved Mantle, and he told me exactly what you said, which was he was a great teammate. I mean, he really was. I mean, he was not great with the media, but he was a great teammate, and his teammates loved him, and he could be tough, but he was also in the clubhouse. He was really one of the guys, and so I think that's what really bothered a lot of the players that Bouton would go after Mantle. But I don't think Bouton looked at it like he was going after Mantle. That's the thing. I think Bouton just thought he was telling the truth, whereas it was interpreted that he was going after him and he was trying to take him apart or bring him down. But that's Bouton was pretty adamant to me, saying no, that's not what he was trying to do. He was trying just to portray him as he was.
Talking about Mitchell Nathanson, wrote the book Bouton about Jim Bouton. Now, interestingly, Bouton starts off like a ball of fire. Comes on to those great Yankee teams. Ford's established. They have the young lefty in Al Downing. They have the young righty in Bouton. Bouton wins 21 games in 1963. He wins 18 games and 2 World Series games in 1964. And then as the Yankees deteriorate viciously in Mantle's last 4 years, 65, 66, 67, 68, Bouton hits hard times there. Bouton never got back to where he was those first 2 years. I mean, those first 2 years, Bouton looked like he was going to be a superstar.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that was that nobody thought he was going to have those 2 years before he had them, because he wasn't a superstar in the minors either. I mean, he was a guy who he looked like he had to work harder than everybody else just to get on the field. I mean, you looked at his motion, his delivery. I mean, it looked painful. You can see how a guy like that
used to knock his cap off. He used to knock his cap off when he threw the ball over the top. He used to knock his cap off all the time.
Yeah, I mean, he looked like a guy who was going to hurt himself, and that's what happened, But he had these 2 years out of the blue, that were just fantastic years. And one thing I focus on in the book is that he started to hold out, after his first good year, and then he held out again after his second good year. And I think the Yankees were particularly tough on him because they felt that those 2 years were flukes. They didn't think that this was a guy who was going to become a Whitey Ford. They thought this is the guy.
And what's amazing is, as you know, Mitchell, he has great World Series games. Even in '63, he lost the game to Don Drysdale 1-0. I mean, he pitched a great game in the World Series that year. The Yanks got beat 4 straight, but I remember that 1-0 game. He pitched a great game in that 1-0 game. So even that, the next year, he wins Game 3 and Game 6 against the great Cardinal team. So I mean, he pitched really well in those World Series games.
Yeah, I think he beat Curt Simmons twice, right?
Yeah.
In '64.
Yes.
Right. And he should have beaten Drysdale.
Mm-hmm.
But
pitched great.
Bounce.
Pitched great, in that game. Yeah, absolutely. So he had great games. Did he have? Because I don't remember this. Did he have? Was it just the team was terrible, or did he have some arm trouble after that?
Well, he had arm trouble in '64.
Okay.
So the interesting thing about '64 was that he still had a really good year, but after the World Series, after the Cardinals beat them, a few of the Cardinals were interviewed and said, we heard all these things about Bouton and how hard he threw, and we were expecting Koufax, and this guy wasn't throwing hard at all. And even by the World Series in '64. He was gassed and his arm was bothering him, and so when he comes into '65, he's got like a dull ache, in his arm, and so it's not something that's like a radical injury. He didn't break it or injure it at a specific point. It was just something that bothered him starting in '64, and it just never got any better. I mean, if it was 20 years later, somebody would have done rotator cuff or something, and he would have been okay. But this is 1964, 65, and when that happens, you're done.
And Bouton never, you can tell me, I can look it up. I don't remember. I know you left the team after the 68 season or during the 68 season. I know 69 he was gone, but he never really had another good year, right? He never even won 10 games again, right?
No, he never did. He had, he would have a start here and there where he looked like the old Jim Bouton, but then he was never able to put it together. And,
then he tried that comeback later on, right? Didn't he try a comeback? Right?
Yeah, in 78, right?
Yeah.
78, he came back and he actually won. He won a game. I think he beat the Giants, who were at that point were battling for the Western Division with the Reds.
Now,
so he didn't pitch that badly.
Now, Bouton started doing, if I remember right, Bouton, and we're talking with Mitchell Nathanson, who wrote the book Bouton. What's the publisher? Nebraska Press? Is that what it is?
Yes.
Okay, Nebraska Press is the publisher. How long has the book been out? A couple weeks?
Yeah, May 1st.
Okay.
It came out.
Okay. So, and again, folks, the folks who know me know I don't usually do this with books, but in this crazy time, I have not read this book. I don't interview authors who books I haven't read, and I will read it because it'll interest me. And I'm going to read the Allen book too. I didn't know there was a Richie Allen book, but I haven't read it yet, and I put the author on, which is very unusual for me. But I remember that he started to do some TV work on the weekend doing sports, if I remember. Even before he retired, I think he started doing some subbing, doing some TV local work, if I remember right.
Well, he started right after he left the Astros in 70. Within a few weeks he was on WABC.
That's it.
Channel 7.
That's what I remember. Remember. Right. Yeah.
I mean, really quick.
Right.
Yeah.
And he started doing sports on TV, doing like on the newscast. He was doing some sports, the little 5-minute segments or 3-minute segments. He was doing that.
Yeah, he did the 11 p.m. sports on the recommendation of Howard Cosell, by the way.
Oh, well, really? Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
I spoke to the producer of that newscast, and I asked him, well,
did he think Bouton was good? Was Bouton good?
I said Cosell recommended him because he thought he was an interesting guy, but he also thought that he would bother so many people that he'd get kicked off the air eventually, which didn't happen. But Keith Olbermann told me that growing up in New York, he would watch Bouton's newscast, and he sort of patterned his sports centers of the 90s after Bouton's sportscast of the 70s when he was pretty irreverent,
Yeah, he was irreverent. I remember that.
Yeah.
Okay, I remember him a little bit. Now, tell me the genesis of the book, because I don't remember. I remember reading it as a kid. I don't remember. Was he doing any literary work before he decided to write the book? Tell us about how Ball 4 came about.
Yeah, he wrote a couple of things for Sport magazine in the 60s. He wrote a good piece about being sent to the minors. That was the first really in-depth thing he wrote. And if you go back and read that, it really sounds like something you would have read in Ball 4. I mean, he takes you right into the locker room where, the moment you find out you're not going north when everybody's bag is on the bus except yours. And so, that's the sort of stuff that you see in Ball 4, and that's where you start to see it there. He wrote another thing about the Mexico City Olympics in '68. And so he had done a few things, and so he was interested in writing something bigger, and he had always told his mom he wanted to write a story about baseball. And when he got to Seattle, he told me that he was waiting to write a book until after he became a superstar, because that's how it was done, right? I mean, nobody wants a book from a guy who's kind of hanging on. But then when he got to Seattle, he realized, well, that's not going to happen.
What year was Ball 4?
Ball 4 came out in 70.
1970. And if I remember right, now I could be wrong, but and we're talking with the author of the book Bouton, Mitchell Nathanson. The first line of the book is, you think you grip the ball, but the ball really grips you. I think that was is that the first line of the book? I think
that's the last line.
Last line of the book.
You spend your whole life gripping the baseball and find out it's the other way around.
Gotcha.
The whole time.
Okay, yeah, that's it. And I remember reading it as a kid, and obviously it was a big deal. And this book caused, earthquakes, and really the reaction in baseball was unbelievable, because this really ripped the lid off as we know it, and I think really changed the money changed the relationships between players and media. Once the money changed, it changed dramatically. But I think this changed it a lot too, because all of a sudden it was a little different kind of coverage, and now anything went. I mean, Babe Ruth, as people may not know or may know, he would run through, you know, train cars naked, and they wouldn't write it. I mean, with some girl chasing him, and it wouldn't be in the paper. Now everything's in the paper, and in that book, he wrote about the guys being, I guess the best way to say it is, childish or feeling their oats, or wrote about them looking at girls in the stands and doing different things and blah blah blah, and really ripped the lid off what went on in baseball, and a lot of it had to do with Mickey Mantle's image, and it caused. How would you explain what the earthquake that Ball 4 caused?
It was like a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, that's about it. That's about it. Yeah.
And Bouton happened to be in New York when the first excerpts. The book was excerpted in Look magazine.
Okay.
A few weeks before it came out, and so the excerpt hit the newsstand when the Astros, who Bouton was playing for, were playing the Mets, and so the book hit the excerpt.
And I'm sure the excerpts was something about Mantle doing something that was it was something that was going to cause some quite a stir, and it was either him doing something with a woman or checking a woman out or doing something. So it was his antics, which we all know now were legendary. Bouton wrote about them at that time, which was almost. No one even thought it was possible that anyone would ever say such a thing.
Right, and by the time the book came out, even the publisher was skittish about publishing it. And
really?
Yeah, and so what happened by that point was it was Bouton and his editor Len Schechter, who was a columnist for the Post.
Right.
Yeah, Schechter was the one who was he was a sports editor at Look, and so he knew he had to sell the book through the excerpt. He put all the salacious stuff in the excerpt. So you're right. So in that excerpt, you have Mantle drunk. Coming in,
and Schechter was one of those guys who covered the Yankees in the early '60s, if I remember right. He was covering the team during those days too.
Right. So he covered the Yankees throughout the early and mid '60s before he left.
Right.
And he put everything in that excerpt, and so everything salacious that you heard about Ball 4, all of it was in that excerpt. And so when that excerpt hit the stands, it was, like I said, it's like a bomb dropped. And Bouton actually plays that day in New York. He comes in relief at Shea Stadium. And just gets booed by 47,000 people.
And what was his life like right after the book comes out? I mean, what was his life? Can you depict for us what it was like? What went on with the players, the reaction, everything else? I know the team, they were furious, but how bad did it get?
Well, it was chaos. I mean, the book opens in his hotel room the morning of that excerpt with Howard Cosell banging on the door trying to get in. Phone ringing off the hook. Bouton at that point knew that his career was pretty much over. So for him, it didn't. It wasn't like he was going to be banned from baseball. He knew he was pretty much done anyway.
Right.
But it was chaotic.
And Mickey was retired by this time.
Yeah, Mickey was done.
Yeah.
And so Bouton was. I think to a large extent, first of all, he was worried because he was getting a lot of bad press from the Dick Youngs of the world,
right?
Who were writing a lot of stuff about the book. But
what was the worst thing somebody said about the book?
The worst thing? Well, Young called him a social leper. He wrote 3 days in a row. Dick Young dedicated his column to how terrible Jim Bouton was, and players were screaming. Pete Rose specifically was yelling at him from across the dugout. Because he. According to them,
he broke the
rules.
He broke the rules. He broke the code. It was a player who told what went on in the locker room. Instead of what you see here stays here, he told the stories of what went on. Depict for us, if you can, his life right after that.
So, like I said, it was chaotic, and he was dealing a lot with the media. And then, on top of that, he wasn't pitching very well for Houston. Right, and as Larry Durker told me, it's not going to take at that point. It's not going to take much for them to find a reason to get rid of you, and so that's what happened. He stuck around for a few weeks By the end of July, so the book comes out in the middle of June. By the end of July, he's out of baseball.
Did the book sell well right away?
Oh yeah,
It did.
It was a huge bestseller.
Okay.
It was number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list for like 17 weeks. You know, The Sensuous Woman was always number 1.
Okay, The Sensuous Woman was always number 1. Because sports books rarely go to number 1. Rarely. You know,
almost never.
Right, never. They hardly ever break the top 10. So his book was number 2 for that many. Did Bouton make a lot of money from the book?
Not so much on the hardcover, but he made a lot on the paperback.
He did, okay.
And so that book ended up selling.
And the book sold forever, right?
Oh, it still sells.
It still sells.
If you look on Amazon now, it's still, you know, a pretty good seller in sports books, at least. I mean, it sold 5.5 million
So you're
copies.
talking about a book that's been out for 40 years that is still, it's one of those, it's like Catcher in the Rye. It's a classic, right? I mean, people will buy that book forever.
It's hard to find a book that's not assigned in high schools that sells more than Ball 4 on an annual basis.
Right. That's wild. That's why. So we would be right in calling it a classic. It is a classic.
Oh, it is a classic.
Yes.
And that book is going to sell forever.
Wow. Oh, and so what happens to Jim right after? I'm trying to remember because I don't remember off the top of my head. I remember everybody going crazy. I remember the reaction in baseball. I remember all that. When he leaves baseball, what does he wind up doing right away? Does he go writing? Does he do another book? What does he do?
Well, he goes right to WABC, Channel 7.
He goes right back to TV, okay.
He goes on TV pretty quickly.
Gotcha.
And he gets that 11 p.m.
I remember that.
Sports anchor slot.
Right.
And that WABC was number 3 at that point. It was number 1 within like 2 bookings.
Wow.
And you know, he really changed the way sports was broadcast. I mean, there were jock sportscasters before Bouton. I mean,
oh sure,
Frank Gifford,
Phil Rizzuto, Pat Summerall, Frank Gifford, they all did it. Yeah,
right. But he you know, Bouton liked to refer to Gifford as a refrigerator salesman. And he said, "I'm not like Gifford. I'm not out here selling refrigerators. I'm out here to report or to give my perspective."
Well, Gifford was a star too. He wasn't. Gifford was a star. I mean,
right.
he was a big star.
He's
a matinee idol. Yeah.
Yeah, he's different than Jim Bouton.
Yeah, but Bouton now his relationship to baseball. It takes how long to thaw, or did it never thaw?
It never thawed.
Never thawed.
So
okay.
He makes his comeback in '78.
Right.
And
I remember that.
Yeah. Well, even when he makes his comeback, while he's striking out Joe Morgan and Bill Madlock in his comeback, and even after those games when he strikes these guys out, those guys are criticizing him in the clubhouse like he shouldn't even be out there. Well, he just struck you out. So.
And he spent most of his life after that. He did television. What happened to Bouton after that? Did he write anymore?
Yeah, so he wrote a follow-up in '71. I'm glad you didn't take it personally.
Okay, I don't even remember that book, to be honest with you. I don't even remember that.
Yeah, so he dedicated that to Dick Young.
Okay. All right. And he never and he and Mantle did make up, if I remember right. Right? They did. They Mantle said he forgave him, right?
Yes. So and that was in '95 when Mantle's son died.
Okay.
And so I think what happened at that point was Bouton sent a condolence card, and then Mantle called him and left a message saying that he didn't blame him, because he didn't blame Bouton for everything, and he wasn't the reason that Bouton had never been invited back to Yankee Stadium, because Old Timers Day every year.
Right. They didn't have him come back. Right.
They never had him back.
Right.
And so Mantle's message was, I never told anybody
to ban
not
you.
to invite you.
I believe that because I don't think Mantle was that way. I agree. I bet you that's true.
So what happened? I was able to figure out what happened in that story, and a lot of people blame Steinbrenner for that, but I found that wasn't Steinbrenner's fault either.
Who was it?
It was a guy named Jim Ogle.
I remember Jim Ogle. I know who he was. Yeah, he's the guy, and he was in charge of Old Timers Day in those days. Yeah.
Right, and if you go into the index on Ball 4, you will see that Bouton really trashes Ogle.
Oh, he does?
In Ball 4, because Ogle used to write for the New York Star Ledger, and he basically called him a house man and stuff like that. And Ogle hated him. And so, Ogle was the guy who controlled Old Timers Day, and he decided who went, and every year he found a reason not to invite Bouton. And so that it was really Ogle who kept Bouton out. Steinbrenner wasn't even aware of this until the push was made to have him come back after Bouton's daughter was killed in a car accident. At that point, Ogle had kind of semi-retired. He was still there, but there was somebody else who was
I
kind
think
of
Marty Appel was running it at the time. It might have been Marty Appel running it, probably.
well, not at that point.
Yeah,
he was
okay.
gone as well. But there was another guy,
Right.
a couple guys who I spoke to who were really running it, and they said they went up to Steinbrenner and they said, hey, you got to invite this guy back. And Steinbrenner was, well, what's the big deal? And he's like, well, he's banned. And Steinbrenner said, I didn't ban him. And it was one of these things where people assumed that it came from Steinbrenner.
Right. And
but
never
it
did.
Didn't come from Steinbrenner.
Never
No.
did. How did Bouton, how were his later years? I mean, what was his life?
Well, he did a lot of different things. He helped invent and market Big League Chew. That's chewing gum. Right?
I didn't even know that. Is that true? Really?
Yeah. So that was.
So he made money on that?
Yeah, he made a lot more money on Big League Chew than he ever made selling books.
Okay, so he sold the gum. He made a lot of money on the Big League Chew gum.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he got himself involved in a lot of other. He still continued to play. I mean, he played.
He liked to pitch. Right? Did he throw a knuckleball at that time? Was that what he was throwing?
Yeah. So he was pitching up until his 70s. I mean,
he really?
He was playing in semi-pro leagues, anywhere. He was playing in the Albany Twilight League, the Met League. He was playing everywhere, and this was up until his late 60s, early 70s. He was still pitching, he was throwing a knuckleball. He wasn't throwing hard, but he just loved to go out there. And so it's interesting. You mentioned that thing about how you spend your whole life gripping a baseball, and it turns out it's the other way around. I mean, it was really true. I mean, this guy could not stop playing. I mean, even if there was no money on the line, he just liked to go out there and pitch.
And how did Bouton see his life? I mean, first of all, what did he think of his career?
The way he saw his career was that he said to me that he thought he was the first fan who actually was able to suit up and get on the field and play. And he thought that for a guy without the world's greatest amount of talent, he did okay. Yeah, he hurt his arm, but as you said, he had 2 really good years.
Oh, great years. He won 39 games in 2 years and 2 World Series games, and he lost the other one 1-0.
Right, and he didn't just pitch in the big leagues. He pitched for the Yankees.
No, he pitched on 2 pennant-winning teams, and he pitched against Don Drysdale, and he twice beat a great Cardinal team. That Cardinal team went to the World Series 3 times in 4 years. He won 2 games against that Cardinal team.
Yeah, so he was satisfied with it. I mean, I guess he wasn't.
It's
totally
amazing. Well,
but
he had at one point, and we're talking with Mitchell Nathanson, who wrote the book Bouton, Nebraska Press, folks, if you're looking for it. He had a feel after going into 65, arm or none, hey, I'm on my way to something big here. I won 39 games in my first 2 years. I won 2 World Series games. He must have thought he was going to have a pretty good career.
Yeah, that's why he held out.
And then he doesn't win any more games the rest of his career.
No, he struggled pretty much every year after that. I mean, I think it's amazing that he held on as long as he held on, given how long he went without really being successful.
I mean, it really is amazing. I mean, listen, he was on some good teams. Okay, we know that. I mean, he was, 64. I mean, he was on the 2 great teams his first 2 years. Then he's there as the demise starts. Okay, and the first year in 65 they go to 6th, in 66 they go to 10th, and then after that they're mediocre. And then Mantle leaves. He had 4 more years with Mickey. Where he and Mickey, they played together for a long time. Were they close?
Well, they were never good friends. I mean,
never good friends. Okay.
But they were not enemies. And as like I think I said earlier, Bouton liked Mantle, and Mantle thought Bouton was funny.
Right.
Bouton,
I could see that.
Mantle had a tough time figuring Bouton out because he didn't understand.
Well, he was
why
smarter than Bouton too. Probably. I mean, Bouton was the kind of guy who was a smart guy, and Mantle was more of a good old boy.
Yeah, and Mantle couldn't figure out why Bouton was always so friendly with the press. Because Mantle saw the media as the enemy,
right.
And Bouton saw them as his friend.
Gotcha.
On the team plane, Bouton would sit with the press.
Did he have a happy life? As far as I know, he had a tragedy in his life, but did he have a happy life for the most part away from baseball?
I think he had a satisfying life. I mean, it's tough, when you you lose a kid.
He lost
like
a daughter,
that,
right? He lost a
yeah.
daughter, right?
So I don't know if I would ever overstate it, you
Right.
know. And he had, I mean, you know, he did a lot of things, and a lot of things didn't turn out great, but you know, here and there things did. So I think ultimately he was satisfied. Although, you know, I think a guy like him is never 100% satisfied. There's always that kind of that bulldog mentality where you're moving on to the next
And
thing.
that was his nickname. They called him the Bulldog. That was his nickname, Jim Bouton. When he first came up, they called him Bulldog. That was what they called him. I remember that. You know, the amazing thing, Mitchell, is this guy's had really one of the, before the book, he had really one of the odd careers. He comes up on the 62 Yankees, which is a great team. He gets 16 starts. He wins 7 games. The next year, he wins 21 games for the Yankees. He's 24 years old. The next year, he wins 18 games and 2 World Series games for the Yankees and leads the major leagues in starts. And after that, he stays in the majors for 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, and 70, and he never wins 5 games in a season the rest of his life. That's unbelievable when you think about it.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why he hung around was because Mike Burke became the president of the Yankees, and the Yankees, as they were falling apart,
Yep.
they needed personalities.
So they kept him for that reason. Okay.
So he, you know, Bouton was a guy, like, when I went back and started looking at like the old press clippings, you know, I was amazed by how often Bouton's name comes up, and he's quoted over.
So
he
was a guy you could always go to him for a quote.
Yeah, even when he wasn't pitching.
Gotcha.
Most of these stories were just Bouton quotes.
Gotcha.
And he was a guy who, like, you know, he was a guy you could talk to.
Who was his best friend on the team, if
he
he had one? Did he have a good friend on the team when he was growing up?
Yeah, he liked Fritz Peterson.
That figures. That figures.
So, yeah, they were roommates for a while.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah, and, you know, and then obviously the craziness with Peterson and Kekich, but so he was living with Fritz Peterson for a while. Wow, that's wild. I could see that. Okay, because Fritz was a little goofy too. We know that. Yeah.
Yeah, so they were roommates for a while until the Yankee pitching coach, I think, was Jim Turner at the time.
Jim Turner. Yes.
Yeah, he went to management and said that
break him up.
You know, Bouton was a communist, and so they had to separate him from Peterson. And so then Bouton got his own room after that.
Oh, he got his own room. Wow.
Yeah, it's only because they thought he was a communist.
And what's the and then he writes Ball 4. And Ball 4 follows him really the rest of his life, right? I mean, it's that classic of work. How long did it take for Ball 4 to go from being shocking to become a classic?
It didn't take long, because what happened in the wake of Ball 4 was all of a sudden you got all of these tell-alls, right? And within a year, every athlete, baseball, football, basketball, is signed a deal and promising to spill their guts about
so you
what's
got
going on.
Megacy writing the football book, and you got all that stuff right after that, right? Writing all the North Dallas 40. You have Phil Dent. You know, you got all those guys writing all those books and everything. So yeah, I can see that.
It happens really fast,
right.
and so what happens is very quickly. Anything you read in Ball 4 is eclipsed by what you're reading in, North Dallas 40,
right? Or Megacy's book. I don't remember the name of it, but he wrote a book about everything that went on in football, the drugs and everything else. And absolutely, yeah. So it got to a point where Ball 4 wasn't that shocking anymore, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and the amazing thing is that it didn't fade away, right? So it sticks around even though it's not shocking, and the reason it sticks around is because it's a great read.
Did Ball 4 need Mantle? Could it have been successful if it didn't have such an iconic? I mean, Mickey Mantle was as big an athlete as there was in the world. I mean, there were millions of people who won't know anything about Mickey Mantle. He was everything to everybody. Did it help a lot that it was Mantle, or would it have been a classic if the guy was Joe Smith?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think in the excerpts, it was the fact that it was Mantle.
Right.
That's what caused the blow up. And also, you know, that excerpt also had a thing about Whitey Ford doctoring the ball.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Elston Howard
scuffing the ball on his shin guard. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So you have Mantle and Ford, right, who are the the golden boys of the 50s.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that if it wasn't Mantle and Ford, it might not have blown up the way it blew up. But most of Ball 4 really is about the pilots. right? The Seattle Pilots.
Right.
And so there's nobody on the Seattle Pilots who you would remember outside of Ball 4. And so I think so I think you make a good point that I think a lot of the explosion is because of Mantle, but I think the reason it endures has very little to do with Mantle.
Right, and I tell you, it changed. Let's be honest, it changed the way sports was covered. It changed everything. It's a book that is not only a classic; it's a book that absolutely changed the way sports was covered in this country, and it changed the relationship between players and the media. I don't think there's any question that that's all true about what Ball 4 did. It was that important. Now, before I let you go, and I appreciate your time, let's spend 5 minutes on one of my favorite subjects, which was Richie Allen. I was a Mantle guy. I worship Mantle, but I loved Richie Allen. As a matter of fact, I would go to Shea Stadium just to see Richie Allen hit. Richie Allen was one of the great, great hitters that I ever saw, and I firmly believe Richie Allen, to me, hit 350 home runs, and he did it playing basically at half speed. If he had ever wanted to be great, I think he could have been one of the greatest players of all time. What did you uncover about Richie Allen?
Well, I think he did play at full speed. I don't think he practiced at full speed.
Gotcha.
Right? So
do you think he cared about baseball though?
I think.
I know he had a lot on. I know he had interest in horses and women and stuff like that. But I mean, and I know his brother was a horse trainer. But I always got the idea that if we ever got the full, like when he hits 40 homers in '66. It seemed to me whenever he was motivated, like he was when he first went to the White Sox, you could have gotten that every year out of him. It seemed to me,
Well, I think that contrary to Bouton, who was a fan, I don't think Allen was ever a fan. I think he knew he had a talent that would bring him whatever amount of money it's going to bring him before the era.
He could just flat out hit, is what it was.
Right,
yes.
and I think he wanted to do his best, but I don't think he didn't approach it the way Bouton. If he approached it the way Bouton approached it, I think it would have been different for him. But he looked at it like it was a job. He didn't look at it like it was a game, and so this was his profession. He would show up, and one of his things he would say is, "On time is game time." You want me here, you're paying me for game time. I will be here at game time. And up until '69, when he missed a doubleheader at Shea, actually.
Right.
But before that, he was never late. Before that, he wouldn't go to batting practice. He wouldn't do pregame stuff, and but he would show up for the games, and he would bust his ass during the game. But if you wanted to talk to him afterwards, he wouldn't tell you much.
Did you spend a lot of time talking to him for the book?
No, he wouldn't talk.
Oh, he wouldn't talk to you. Okay.
Everybody around him talked to me.
Did his brother talk to you?
Actually, well, he and his inner circle would not talk to me.
Gotcha.
Although, interestingly, once the book came out, they did. But I was like, well, it's too late now. What do you want me to do about it?
Did you talk to who'd you talk to the most about? Or who was the player that you talked to most about Allen?
Oh, let's see. Well, I talked to people he played with the White Sox, particularly Melton.
And he played great for the White Sox.
Yes.
I mean, his first year with the White Sox was unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, and there were some players with off the top of my head, I can't remember so much, but some Phillies. I can't remember their names.
So, did you like Allen? I mean, what made you do Allen?
The reason I did Allen is because I had written another thing about the Phillies, and I just kind of mentioned Allen, and I got more response from that about people on one side saying he was misunderstood, and on the other side saying he was the biggest jerk ever.
I think he was misunderstood, and I think at times he was the biggest jerk ever. I think he probably was both. But I tell you, what he could do was he could flat out scare you when he was in the batter's box. He wasn't a good hitter. He was a great hitter. He was a great hitter.
He had 11 years where he was the best hitter in baseball.
Oh, he was, I'm telling you, power and speed with that big, power and average with that big bat. And I'm telling you, he was scary. Absolutely. I saw him hit a ball as a Cardinal off at Shea Stadium was the longest ball I ever saw hit. And I'm telling you, man, he had days with the Phillies at Shea Stadium that were unbelievable. He was an amazing hitter, absolutely amazing. I used to love to watch him play, absolutely. And of course, he always wore that batting helmet in the field because they used to throw things at him. At least he said they threw things at him. I don't know. He got used to wearing that batting helmet in the field all the time. That was kind of his trademark, always wearing that batting helmet in the field.
Yeah, he always wore that batting helmet in the field, but
Yeah.
I found out that he was wearing that batting helmet way before, when he was started playing professional ball, because he didn't like players used to wear the regular
Right,
cap.
he didn't like the cloth cap, right?
Well, he used to put that cloth cap. He used to put it in your back pocket.
Right.
And he said when you would slide, it would get full of dirt. So he just said, well, that cap would get all messed up. I'll just wear the helmet. So I mean, people did throw stuff at him. I mean, that is true.
Yeah, and he wrote "Boo in the Dirt." He sketched "Boo in the Dirt" in Philly and stuff. He had a love-hate with the fans there. That's for sure, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think a lot of people in Philadelphia loved him, but there was a strong contingent of people who really didn't like him for a lot of other reasons. I mean, the stadium. There was an issue with the stadium, and I think a lot of people looked at Allen and they saw in Allen everything they didn't like about the changing city of Philadelphia.
Right.
And Allen had nothing to do with that, but that he paid the price for a lot of things that he had absolutely nothing to do with.
Well, that's fascinating stuff. I'm telling you, he's an interesting character, and I thought one of the great hitters. I think really a guy who falls, he kind of falls between the cracks because, he had a good career, but he didn't have the greatest career, and I don't think people realize how good he was. He was unbelievable. He really was. He was an amazing offensive player.
He's one of the few guys, like the old-time guys whose advanced metrics make him look better.
Oh, I totally agree. He was dangerous. I mean, he when he was on his game, you didn't want to see him coming up to the plate. That was for sure. He was absolutely scary. Well, listen, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on. Good luck with the book. So the book is Bouton, Nebraska Press, an interesting character who wrote a book that is still a classic, and I highly recommend it to this day. If you're in high school or something and you want to learn about sports and a book that's a cornerstone book, that's it. Ball 4 is a cornerstone book of all time. And check out the book Bouton. Thanks very much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you. Mitchell Nathanson, the author of Bouton, back after this.